Shalom, welcome. This is TV7's Israel at War update, and as we're set to discuss the latest developments here in the Middle East, in Washington, D.C., with implications for our region, as well as the latest vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran anticipated negotiations, apparently, either direct or indirect. We'll soon find out. But before all that, let's just mention that today we mark day 550 since October 7th of 2023, meaning that 59 hostages, 24 of them at least, 24 or as much as 24 rather, are still alive in Hamas captivity, horrendous conditions, and we are still waiting for some type of breakthrough in this regard. But before all that, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today, to include also Mr. Amir Oren, of course, our TV7 editor-at-large, who's here with me in the studio in Jerusalem today, and coming to us from Washington, D.C., retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs, and next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a Senior Officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. And I'd like to start with you, Mr. Oren. Yesterday was a very dramatic, of course, meeting between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump at the Oval Office. Much was discussed, of course, with the press availability, quite lengthy in reference, of course, to other meetings, or in relative to other meetings, that is. But one topic was, of course, highlighted in that discussion, the Gaza Strip. Give us your 2 cents on that specifically.
So we are trying to digest what transpired there. Obviously, some of it, perhaps the most important part, was behind closed doors. But one thing that can be said is that it went off better than the Zelensky meeting held.
An understatement.
In the same premises with the same cast on the American side. And one member of the American group was Special Envoy Stephen Witkoff, who is going to lead the American side in the negotiations with the Iranians, who will be represented by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. This is what President Trump referred to as very high level. Now, perhaps we will see some convergence of the Witkoff missions to Gaza, regarding Gaza.
I was about to say, since Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, is in charge, he's holding the file of negotiations for the release of the hostages. At least one living hostage in Hamas captivity is an American national, and therefore this is very close to the president's heart. But beyond that, there are other aspects to that. But to what degree is his attention span focused on the negotiations with the Islamist Hamas via Qatari and Egyptian brokerage there, at a time when he also needs to deal with very pressing issues of global magnitude?
So there may be an overlap between the Iranian file and the Hamas file. If he can get the Iranians to press Hamas to release at least Idan Alexander, the dual national whom Trump referred to as Alex, and perhaps others, then Iran will get some points with Trump. And we may see some progress on the furtherance of the ceasefire, mini deal, and the hostage release. There are other topics which took place yesterday on other fronts, but we can get to those later.
Well, that would, of course, revoke Iran's capacity to maintain deniability, since its culpability is, of course, an allegation that it refuses time and again to acknowledge. But let's now turn to General Kimmett, since I'd like to hear your take, particularly on the Iran file. Of course, The United States has brought very significant vessels, military assets at large, to the Middle East in order to threaten the Islamic Republic of Iran and maintain a truly credible threat to the Iranian nuclear file, and not only the nuclear file, the regime at large. Looking at yesterday's meetings and the various remarks that came out from the White House, what is your take on that?
Well, I agree primarily with what Amir said, and I believe that there's still some question. Perhaps the Iranians have confirmed direct negotiations, but prior to that meeting, all they were talking about was indirect. I think it's important to go back to also the point that Amir made about the role of Special Envoy Witkoff. It's also important to recognize that he also is in charge of Ukraine negotiations as well. And this goes back to what we've talked about before, which is now being labeled inside of Washington, D.C., the reverse Kissinger. So Steve Witkoff is going to be a very, very busy man traipsing between Gaza discussions, Iran discussions, and Ukraine discussions. Whether what we're seeing with regards to the Iranian negotiations is subset over this larger overarching policy of the reverse Kissinger, I think, Jonathan, is a term you've used, or if we're going to focus specifically on Iran is yet to be seen.
Indeed. General Sofri, I'd like to hear your take on this as well. But as General Kimmett mentioned, the Islamic Republic of Iran remains very vocal about the fact that it views what is going to happen as indirect negotiations. Of course, we did hear the remarks coming out of Moscow with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stating that the negotiations themselves are going to be held in Oman on Saturday, and that they have been updated, that there are going to be both indirect and direct negotiations, meaning that both of them are right.
I don't know to say who is more right. Maybe it's going to be direct or indirect. It doesn't really matter at the first stage, because the fact that Iran understands the situation, understands the threat, understands the risk, and it sees all the American assets that are being gathered around the Middle East, meaning the first carrier that is being here, so it is being deployed here for a long time. The second one, which is on its way. The bombers that are deployed on Diego Garcia and so on. And they understand that the Americans are now willing to use power, if needed. And therefore, the best solution for them, and President Trump emphasized it yesterday on his speech, he said that it's more logical to go into negotiation to try to get to some formula that in the end will bring the end to the nuclear program of Iran for many years ahead. Now, the Iranians sees it as a kind of what we call a saving rope that is being thrown by the Americans, and they're willing to go into negotiations. That means the Iranians will go on their own terms, what we call the Persian Bazaar. That means they will begin dragging time and consulting and getting back and trying to insist on some of the cases, on some of the points that are being raised up within this negotiation and so on, and to drag it as long time as they can. And they know that in between, or in the meanwhile, nobody will attack them, neither the Americans nor the Israelis. And therefore, they have all the ambition now to go into negotiations. And whether it's direct or indirect, it's not the main issue, because it's not the main important issue, because nevertheless, they speak to each other. Even if it's going through meditation, it doesn't really make the big difference right now, because in the end, they will come to some solution, hopefully, that will enable them to stay in power and to preserve some of the capabilities. On the other hand, the Americans will be pleased that they achieved the goal, that Iran will delay and postpone for many years ahead its nuclear program, and everything is fine.
Thank you, General Sofri. And Mr. Oren, the delaying their feet or dragging their feet is something that everybody expects, of course, of the Iranians to do. They don't really intend to fully eradicate their nuclear program, as Prime Minister Netanyahu suggested that it might be, if it's like the Libya file, where it ended all of Libya's nuclear infrastructure, that would be something also acceptable to Israel. But nonetheless, that is not something the Iranians intend to bring forward. And therefore, we did see an interview by Morgan Ortegas on Al Arabiya where she said, we're not going to accept that. There is a very small window of opportunity for Iran to reach an agreement. If it doesn't do so, the alternative is on the table.
What the Iranians want, we know, of course, it's sanctions relief. Their economy is in tatters. And they are willing to pay by concessions on the nuclear file.
Isn't there already a step beyond that, considering the fact that the survivability of the regime is on the scale at this moment?
It always is. This is always the fallback position. They are willing to sacrifice everything except the regime, but we are not there yet. Now, the semantic question of direct or indirect is irrelevant. The correct term is possibly proximity talks, because it is going to be held at the same venue, Oman, and what we heard was at the presence of the hosts. So we may see face-to-face, trilateral meetings with the Omanis perhaps silent, or else the indirect speech would be, hey, Mark, could you please tell Amnon, who is sitting next to you, that so-and-so? And then Amnon tells you, please tell Amir. And so this is really just a diplomatic tactic. It has nothing to do with substance. What the Trump team emphasized going into the surprise announcement Monday is that they are mostly concerned with verification. This is, for them, the point which was absent in the JCPOA. And, of course, this happened 10 years ago when Netanyahu went to Congress behind Obama's back. He is not able, and he is not willing to do it now, to Trump. So Netanyahu is right now at a disadvantage vis-a-vis the American administration on Iran.
Yes, but with that being said, Israel never said that it opposes a diplomatic track, so long as it ensures truly that the Islamic Republic does not attain nuclear weapon capabilities.
But during the Obama time, Israel did not even want to have its input in the negotiations, because this would have meant blessing the negotiations and acquiescing with the result. Now it will probably consult with the Americans and try to influence the negotiation.
And that, of course, was rooted in the fact that the prior arrangement was based on a political arrangement between the sides rather than a technical one, which brought about the joint plan of action rather than the subsequent 2015 joint comprehensive plan of action. And, of course, we can deliberate whether
also
or not
emanating out of the Oman talks.
Right.
Led by Bill Burns.
Which was focused initially on track 2. But General Kimmett, I'd like to shift gears to the Syrian file, also another topic discussed in those discussions in the press availability at the Oval Office. President Trump mentioned that Turkey managed to conquer Syria after many tried and failed over the course of 2,000 years. Naturally, that is not accurate, but nonetheless, there is here a analogy for the 1500s when the Turks at the time, of course, were more proactive under Selim I, defeated the Persians on August the 23rd of 1514, and 2 years later, plus 1 day, the 24th of August of 1516, they went and they conquered the Syrian front, of course, that was controlled by the Mamluks back then. Within that context, of course, the Turks are eager now to somehow gain the upper hand, to entrench military, to gain the contracts, and to really rebuild Syria in accordance with their vision, something that Israel is not willing to accept. Now, President Trump insisted last night that this is something that he's willing to broker and to somehow find that middle ground that would play in maintaining the security interests of both sides. How do you view that?
Yeah, first, I just mentioned very quickly the point about verification. We've been tricked by verification before. As you remember, the Syrians said they didn't have any gas capabilities, and that was declared by NSA Rice at that time. And then, of course, when they did use gas, she was quick to say, "Well, we verified everything they declared." So, in terms of Iran, verification is not enough because declaration needs to be looked at very, very carefully. Now let's get to Syria. There is a large issue about what Turkey wants inside of Syria. My personal view is they are just trying to have a hegemonic relationship with Syria for security purposes. Now, certainly they'd like to take part in the reconstruction of Syria as well. And the U.S. view is, until proven otherwise, we are going to let al-Shara continue to unify his country, set up the governance structures, set up a single military force, put all the military power under him. I believe there's some concerns that people have that al-Shara is basically just a Trojan horse. And sooner or later, he'll open that Trojan horse and all of his past radical Islamist tendencies will spew out of it. But for now, Turkey seems to want to be the hegemon for the reason, wants to, for the country, also wants to make a significant profit off the rebuilding. And candidly, I think the U.S. view is simple, that it's better to have Turkey as a hegemon in there rather than let al-Shara do it all by himself.
Right, utilize the leverage over Turkey in order to control Syria, but nonetheless, calling the kettle black when we're looking at Ahmed al-Shara or Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. He is still an al-Qaeda man in ideological terms. He still views the world from that lens, and you can see it on the ground in the different institutions, the manner in which he is structuring everything around him. Much of it is more just for appeasing the West, so to speak, from a lens perspective, but rather he does not really intend to implement any of the Western prerequisites that were put in place in front of him, understanding also that the Europeans are very keen on seeing the Syrians in their countries return to Syria as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and the Turks do as well. The Turks have they've been the largest number of Syrians that have left Syria that they would like to push back into their country because they have been hosting these Syrians for many, many years. The only challenge I have with the comments that you just made is you're indirectly saying that the United States government is being naive and has the wool pulled over its eyes, that somehow we take a look at this guy and think he's the next Thomas Jefferson, and that's why we're supporting him. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just a matter of time whether this Trojan horse will end up and the Islamist forces, the radical Islamists spew out of it, and he will prove that he is, in fact, what you believe he is, or if that there is the slightest bit of chance that he is understanding he's in a better shape turning to the West than turning to the East. I don't think the United States is stupid. I don't think the United States is blinded by that. And I think the United States is just taking a different viewpoint that may be more temporal and have a little more time than Israel views the problem.
Well, I never mentioned naive. We both know the majority of the people at play within the current administration, and they're anything but being naive when it comes to the Islamic State or Al Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood at that. But nonetheless, they have more important things to do, so their attention span for this file is obviously limited in comparison to other places at hand.
And I disagree with that, but let's proceed.
Okay. Well, General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your take on that.
I think there are 2 points of view when you look at Syria today. The first one is the American administration receives the fact that Turkey, which is a member of NATO, is taking part of controlling Syria and trying to stabilize it in their own point of view. And of course, they look at it as what we call a positive move that will help Mr. al-Julani or Ahmad al-Shara to stabilize the country and to get full control on the country. Of course, they want to benefit from the reconstruction of Syria and so on, as has been said, and I fully agree with that. The Israeli point of view is very different because we see that as a threat. The fact that Turkey will deploy its own forces into Syria, meaning to deploy anti-aircraft batteries in T4 airport or other airport in the northern part of Syria, will limit our capabilities to fly freely over this country for many purposes, for air photos and anything else. But nevertheless, when you speak about Turkey being inside Syria, that means that first of all, they will have, for the first time probably in history, a mutual border with Israel. That means that they can deploy forces all over Syria, and we don't want them to happen. We claim that the area of south of Damascus up to the area of Jabal Druze in the southern part of Syria should be clear out of forces, military forces or military presence that will not endanger Israel. On the other hand, we don't want to see there groups of terrorists that are trying to infiltrate into Israel from the Golan Heights on the other side. And therefore, this is a different point of view, and each one has, of course, his own interests, and everybody looks at it differently. And you can't tell who is right and who is wrong. And I don't think the American administration is naive or doesn't really understand the full reality. They look at it differently than the Israelis.
Absolutely. Again, I don't think I ever called them naive, but nonetheless. Mr. Owen, one more file to discuss, which is a very important file. The Houthis, Pete Hegseth, at the directive of President Trump, provided some picture of the current state of play, highlighting that it's only going to escalate.
Yes, up to now, we have seen inputs rather than outputs. We have seen more lethal power. By the way, the carrier task force, which you mentioned, the Carl Vinson being the patron saint of the Navy when he was the head of the Naval Services Committee, and the uncle of Sam Nunn, to boot. The Vinson task force will only replace the Truman task force. They are not going to have two carrier task forces there. For a week or two, they will be there together. But if the talks with Iran go on until June or later, we will still see only one task force, and the third one will go to the Pacific. Now, the Houthis have suffered some blows, but we haven't seen them give up. And while General Kurilla, the commanding general of CENTCOM, has a much freer hand, we haven't seen the Houthis, who have suffered through 6 or 7 years with Saudi Arabia. This campaign is not enough to make them cry uncle.
With that being said, General Kimmett, in contrast to the previous campaign by the previous administration, the current campaign is frustrating the Houthi capacity to follow up on their own promises of launching direct attacks against Israel, of doing all kinds of things, intercepting whatever comes out of their territory, and seemingly degrading them to a point of frustration.
Well, look, I think we've got to understand what the objective of the U.S. efforts and the coalition efforts are. It is not to defeat and totally destroy all the capability of the Houthis. It's just to get them to change their behavior so they no longer see firing on targets inside the Red Sea and inside Israel as an option. I think that Pete Hegseth and his team are going to kind of continue to ramp this up with not only attacks against missile sites, but also attacks, as he said, troops in the open against leadership targets. So we'll see how long it will take before they're willing to change their behavior and stop their missile campaign. One note I would just make, going to the last conversation about Turkey and Israel, you can imagine that the United States EUCOM is talking very carefully to Turkey. We would not want to find ourselves in a position where there's a war between Turkey and Israel, because we have a treaty obligation to support Turkey in that case.
Indeed. General Sofrin?
If they are attacked.
If they are attacked, not if they are the initiators, exactly. General Sofrin, in 45 seconds, the floor is yours.
I think that first of all, the Houthis are frustrated because they don't succeed to launch missiles and UAVs inside Israel. Everything is being intercepted outside the country. The second issue that should be mentioned is that the Iraqi government shut down the office of the Houthis inside Baghdad, and they denied their ability to communicate from Iraq with the Iranians. And this is another signal that they are deterred by the American pressure, and they don't want to be caught with red-handed and, of course, be blamed that are assisting the Houthis, and therefore they are very carefully.
Indeed. Well, to put all things in perspective, also with regard to your comment, General Kimmett, naturally, in the event of Greece and Turkey going at each other, what would happen then with two NATO allies doing just that? That's a question mark that has always been out there, and Article 5 is a lot more ambiguous than being very, very stringent on the capacity of one member state or another going in support of another. But we'll leave that for another discussion. I'd like to immediately thank you, General Kimmett, and General Sofrin. I'd like to thank also Mr. Oren, and to thank all of you at home. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7Israelnews.com.